Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing part 2 of my February wrap-up. I'm having a hard time remembering what month it is. Today I'm going to be talking about books that I read in the second half of the month. I'm going to link up in the cards to the first part of my wrap-up where I talked about the books that I read in the first 2 weeks of the month. So in case you guys are new here or you missed that one, definitely check that out so you can see sort of like the first, I think, 4 or 5 books I read at the beginning of this month. So the first one I'm going to mention is An American Marriage by Tayari Jones, and I'm not going to talk about this one too much here because I did a full review on this book. I adored it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely going to be in my favorites of the year. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about it here because I did an entire video about it, but this book is definitely worth the hype in my opinion. You guys have left some amazing comments on that video though. There are a handful of you guys who didn't enjoy this book quite as much as I did, and it's been fun to see why. It seems like a lot of people get sort of stuck in the mystery trial aspect of it, which to me was not really the point or the focus of the book. Like, it's called An American Marriage, so to me the point was talking about the marriage, not so much the crime that happens. But yeah, this book was great for me and I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it, including on audiobook, which is how I consumed it. The next book that I finished was Tar Baby by Toni Morrison. This is a book that I picked up for 2 reasons. One is because this is the next Toni Morrison I had on my list to read because I'm reading her books in chronological order or publication order. And then also Dee Dee, along with a handful of other Black booktubers, were picking this one up for Read So Lit. So I decided to pick this up as well, although I haven't really participated in anything because I've barely been online this month. This is probably my least favorite Toni Morrison that I've read of hers so far, but that's also a relative thing because Toni Morrison's books have been so strong up until this point. This book mainly takes place in the Caribbean, and you are following this white couple who's older, retired. They moved down to the Caribbean from, I want to say Philadelphia, somewhere in the United States, and they have Black people working as like their maid, cook, and sort of butler situation in the Caribbean. And you're following them, and then you're also following the maid and butler's daughter, Jadine, whose like education has been paid for by the white couple, and then one day this like Black man shows up because of circumstances. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, and so you sort of watch how his entrance into their world sort of changes the dynamics of everything. It's really hard to talk about plot synopsises, by the way, with Toni Morrison books because the point of the story is never really plot. Toni Morrison does really interesting things in this book, as she does in all of her books, where she's exploring sort of this dynamic between white people and Black people and expectations and sort of the roles again that they're playing with the white couple being the bosses over this family, but also like helping the daughter out and her role and sort of her own like performative nature, and the relationship that's formed between this Black man who comes in and sort of what she wants out of her life and what she's expected to want out of her life and things like that. It's a really interesting book, and it's one that I feel like I can't do justice talking about it because it's coming from a very specific perspective that I probably will never have. But I think that what Toni Morrison does in this book really well is explores these sort of power dynamics and just positions in society and expectations that are placed upon people and things like that. The reason why it wasn't really my favorite is because the plot itself was not very compelling in my opinion. The romantic relationship in here, I was having a really hard time understanding, and I just didn't really connect with this book the way that I typically do, at least the way that I have in the past with Toni Morrison's books. So yeah, I enjoyed this book for the most part because it made me think a lot, but I can't say like the plot or the story or anything like that was something like super compelling to me like the way Song of Solomon or like Sula was for me. So yeah, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, I think, or maybe 3.5 out of 5 stars. Again, it's still a great book because it's Toni Morrison, but it's relatively low on my list when it comes to the books that I've read so far. Alright, the next book that I finished was A Dangerous Crossing by Asma Zainat Khan. This is the 4th book, I believe, in the Essica Tak and Rachel Getty mystery series that she's written. I've really enjoyed this mystery series, and I actually think this one is my favorite yet. Please ignore this horrific cover because the book inside is just fantastic. So what Asma Zainat Khan does in her books is she uses this mystery series to explore sort of bigger global things that are happening. In the first one, she talked about the Bosnian War quite a bit. In the second one, she talked about Muslims living in Canada and sort of Muslim extremists. The third book took place in Iran, and this one takes place in different parts of Europe, mostly covering different aspects of the Syrian refugee crisis. I'm actually going to do a full review on this book because I really, really enjoyed it, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in this book that's worth sort of fleshing out more than I'm able to do sort of in these videos. So that will probably be coming next week, most likely. But overall, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and like I said, I think it's my favorite. It's at least in the top 2 because the first one was really, really fantastic as well. I feel like the third one took a little bit of a dip, but this one came back just as strong. I don't know if it's just because I'm really interested and intrigued by the Syrian refugee crisis and sort of stories surrounding that, but I was completely connected with this book and I really, really enjoyed it. And the final book that I'm going to mention is Evicted by Matthew Desmond. The subtitle to this is Poverty and Profit in the American City. I really enjoyed this book. I also gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. It's just as fantastic as everyone says it is. It took me like the entire month to read it, partially just because I was getting really just frustrated with the situations that are happening in this book. So this is a nonfiction book that looks at poverty in the United States, and what Matthew Desmond did is he looked specifically at a handful of people living in Milwaukee, living in poverty, the way that they are circling through the system, the way that they're constantly getting kicked out, the circumstances that they're put in and they put themselves in and things like that. And you see sort of different conditions, people who live in apartments, people who live in trailer parks, people who are homeless or circle out in and out of like shelters and things like that. And he paints a really just honest picture of what life is like for them, the way that being poor is really expensive and it's really hard to get out of poverty right now. But these people also aren't perfect people. Some of them are addicted to drugs. Some of them make really bad just life decisions. But Matthew Desmond also shows how sometimes they just don't know better, or sometimes they don't see a point because it just always seems hopeless for them, and sometimes they have to choose between like working their job and earning some sort of money versus like being able to go to court to fight their evictions and things like that. If they're able to get an apartment, sometimes the conditions are still really, really horrible and things like that. So yeah, it took me a really long time to read this book just because I would read a chapter and get so like frustrated and upset that I wouldn't want to pick it up for a number of days. But don't let that discourage you from reading this book. Like, I think that this is such a good, important book to read, and it really just opens your eyes to the situation that's happening here in the United States right now in cities across the country. And one of the things I really liked about it is that in the epilogue, Matthew Desmond talks about potential solutions to the problem, but he also recognizes that this is a big problem that might require complex solutions and different solutions in different cities and things like that. So yeah, overall, really, really enjoyed this. I also use this for the Book Riot Read Harder challenge of read a book about social science. Don't let the size intimidate you. This copy was only like 330-ish pages. The last like 150 pages or so are all notes and like footnotes and things like that. So yeah, highly, highly recommend this book. So compelling, so interesting. I have a very good, strong feeling I'm going to read more books about housing situations in the United States. Oh, one thing I did want to mention about Evicted that I definitely forgot about until right this second. This book is a little bit confusing. There are a lot of different sort of characters in this story and a lot of different stories that Matthew Desmond is telling you. And it can sometimes get a little bit confusing in terms of keeping people straight and keeping situations straight. It might have just also been because of the fact that it took me so long to read it and the fact that I kept putting it down and picking it back up. But I had a hard time sort of keeping all of the stories straight, and it would kind of take me a little while into a chapter or a couple of pages into a chapter to sort of remember who people were and what their situations were. But personally, I didn't mind that too much. I sort of just rolled with the stories and just sort of took every chapter as its own individual little short story almost, and I would try to recall as this book went on different people's sort of long-term stories. But yeah, I will say that's one flaw of the book, the fact that there are so many characters and it's hard to keep them all straight. All right, that's everything that I have for you guys. Feel free to leave a comment down below letting me know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were on them, or if you have any questions about any of these books, feel free to leave that down in the comment section as well. I didn't really talk about plot very much with these books, partially because I'm either doing separate videos on them or partially because it's hard to talk about plot with all of these books. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.